Hello, good afternoon, and welcome from Sam and Anne with a blast of debrief and analysis from us after a rousing speech here in Liverpool from Keir Starmer. A re-audition to restart his premiership, challenging the snake oil merchants he sees left and right, and promising to renew Britain and take on racism. That got huge cheers from the Labour faithful. But will the country take notice? I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome to this special edition in the back room of the Politico pub. There's a lot going on at this conference. Others digesting everything that happened on stage just now. You can hear some of those others in the background. This afternoon, Keir Starmer armed his party with the weapons he thinks it needs to take on Reform UK. Kemi Badenoch not mentioned once across the hour or so long speech. He promised his party and the country that he does have a vision, a different one from the vision that we have heard before, and that he can define himself against an enemy and that he knows what he wants.
It was a speech that delivered multiple standing ovations for a Prime Minister who's not had a lot of adoration recently. But today he sought to unite his party against reform and set out a kind of governing doctrine. And there was a call to reclaim flags, many flags, the Union Jack, the Scottish Saltire and St George's against populists. Let's hear how that went.
I will fight with every breath I have, fight for working people, fight for the tolerant, decent, respectful Britain that I know. People say, conference, that a nation like ours can't be a community, that it's too diverse, too divided. I reject that. That goes against everything I stand for, everything I've served, everything I understand about this great country that I love. So no matter how many people tell me that it can't be done, I believe Britain can come together, that we can pursue a shared destination, that we can unite around a common good. That is my ambition, the purpose of this government. End decline, reform our public services, grow our economy from the grassroots, and with resolve, with respect, with the flag in our hands, we will renew this country until we can say with total conviction that Britain is built for all. Thank you, conference.
The closing lines there from Keir Starmer's speech, always the lines that strategists know will make the evening news, so it's a vital bit that defines the argument at the heart of Keir Starmer's hour-long address. He stood in front of a logo that said Renew Britain. Frankly, Anne, I think it could equally have said Renew Keir. This felt to me like one of the steadiest, possibly most successful on its own terms moments for Keir Starmer since becoming Prime Minister. Just in the nick of time, given everything that has happened over the last few weeks. Nevertheless, it felt like it went down well in the hall and will go down well in the country. He has finally and clearly defined what he is against. That is one of the most important things in politics, the most important things in elections. Keir Starmer's team say it's aimed at Middle England, tempted by reform. But it was also a speech that went down well with the soft left, who rankled at the tone he took earlier in the year when he was challenging reform and moving politically into some of their positions. Now it looked like a speech that was trying to unify that vote on the left. Voters drifting to the Lib Dems and Greens, he's hoping to claw back. He hopes that patriotism and a sense of mission will achieve that aim.
But was this really about a pitch to the middle, or was it more of a buffet with something for lots of different groups? An all-you-could-eat Keir Starmer special offer? Because one thing that struck me, Sam, was that once we got into it, there was a lot of talking about the working class. There were no kind of synonyms or ways of walking around talking about that. The working class, the idea that many people who consider themselves still working class feel that they have been neglected by many people, middle class, educated, yes, Labour politicians. There was mea culpa there. He said in terms, I think quite directly, that the tone and approach of many people at the top of politics in his own party had not taken seriously the concerns and the sensibilities of many people across the country. He wanted to show, I think, that he had been listening to that critique. there was also that appeal to the soft left, the big values of raising up the working class, the values on which Labour was founded, and the NHS, the National Health Service, was waved. It was like the fifth flag being waved over this speech, partly to draw a dividing line with Nigel Farage, whom he claims is still wildly keen on privatising the NHS, but another dividing line was being drawn. At the same time, he said it needed reform, so he was setting himself up as someone who is an agent of change. For the first time, I think, since Tony Blair, we saw Keir Starmer saying, I'm the person who takes on the mantle of change. I don't do the status quo.
I think let's start by analysing what this speech achieved on its own terms. And one of the things I thought that will be remembered by those in the hall and remembered by the party was the clarion call around racism. Building on remarks earlier this week, he made clear he thinks some of Reform UK's policies are racist, identifying one in particular, the suggestion that people who have been here for many years may be forced to reapply for the right to stay. Let's hear just how he framed that argument.
If you say or imply that people cannot be English or British because of the colour of their skin, that mixed heritage families owe you an explanation, that people who've lived here for generations, raised their children here, built their lives here, working in our schools, our hospitals, running businesses, are our neighbours, if you say they should now be deported, then mark my words, we will fight you with everything we have, because you are the enemy of national renewal.
Clear line in the sand there on the language about immigration and asylum, trying to draw a distinctiveness for Labour between people who feel that they have justified reason to be critical, even to be angry, and racism. Challenged by many this week in the media and in Reform and on the right that he'd made a mistake by using the word racism, a strong word to put at the heart of the debate, a very strong word for a Labour leader to focus on in his yearly address to the party and the country. He doubled down on it. However, he also showed, I think, depended what you were listening for. If you had a different ear, you probably would have emphasised something else. You would have heard him saying from stories that people had told him on the doorstep. And he said he had hinted he'd been a bit discombobulated by it. A lady saying she lived in her street for a very long time said specifically Eastern European migrants had come in and a lot of people did not like. There was a particular group of people who had misbehaved, sort of low-level social disruption, spitting on the pavement, etc., and that people did not like it. So at the same time, I think he went quite a long way into a rhetoric that we might at one point thought was more common in speeches on the right about a lack of integration and a lack of cohesiveness in areas where asylum and immigration have produced adverse results. It depended what you were listening for, but there were quite clever segues.
I think that idea of a very particular dividing line, a very particular policy dividing line, will help Labour now in its fight against reform. It's essentially Keir Starmer's blast against Nigel Farage's big policy announcement of last week that people with indefinite leave to remain may find that status ripped up and asked to leave. Nigel Farage has almost immediately responded to Keir Starmer's speech. Within half an hour, he released a video message. Let me just play you a little bit of the key bit of that.
I used to think the Prime Minister was a decent man, somebody that I could talk to and chat to. We might disagree on worldview, but I thought he was a profoundly decent human being. I am completely shocked at his behaviour. I hope when he wakes up tomorrow morning, he feels ashamed of what he has done. This is a desperate last throw of the dice from a Prime Minister who's in deep trouble, a Prime Minister who can't even command the support of half of his own party. But I'm sorry to say, I now believe that he is unfit to be the Prime Minister.
Quite a curious technique, actually, I thought, from Nigel Farage to suggest that Keir Starmer should feel ashamed tomorrow morning of what he said, I don't think Keir Starmer will. I think that wrapped around by the Labour faithful here in Liverpool, that will be one of the sections of his speech that he's proudest of.
Yes, it depends, doesn't it? Once we leave the Hubble bubble, you can hear we're recording just outside the main hall here from the Politico pub where people are dissecting what they heard. When we leave here, and it is a bubble, all conferences are bubbles, do people take from it that is sensible, that it has good heart, that's broadly speaking what I think? Yeah, I want controlled immigration, I want secure borders, but I know very many people, or maybe my extended family, have worked with people of a different colour, different background, and I'm broadly comfortable with it. Or do they take from it, this debate is now about that, and that Nigel Farage, by coming out quite quickly, can say, a bit like putting a certain number on the side of a bus in the Brexit campaign, one can't say whether it was true or not that it went badly for him. Great, you're now on my territory. If you want to be on my territory, I will now take the initiative. So I think what has happened is we've seen a contest now launched on this territory.
I think it worked in the hall. I think it works with Labour members, and that was one of the biggest points that was the purposes of that section of the speech. Another bit that I think worked in the hall was about how he talked about his working class credentials. Now, I don't know about you, Anne, but whenever I've heard Keir Starmer talk about working people in the past, I felt it jars a bit, because I'm watching a barrister with a clipped middle-class accent talking about his working class upbringing, and it never quite worked. And today he sought to address that. And actually I thought it was quite an interesting way that he did it. He did it by talking about the lives of his family. His father, who always felt slightly patronised for his job as a toolmaker. His brother, who never had the qualifications that he needed. His sister, who works as a carer. Even his wife in the NHS. He rooted his speech and talked about working people, framing it around his family rather than himself, which is an evolution of that. And it was in that context that he came with the biggest policy announcement that we weren't expecting, which was this.
So, conference, today I can announce we will scrap that target and replace it with a new ambition that 2/3 of our children should go either to university or take a gold standard apprenticeship. I can also announce that further education, so long as Cinderella service, ignored because politician kids don't go there.
Now, Anne, I don't know about you, but I really was struck and rather liked that line that apprenticeships are ignored because the kids of politicians don't go there. That's the kind of line that really works out in the country, because nobody likes politicians looking after themselves.
There was also a distancing from the way that aspiration through education and through higher education was espoused in the Blair era, which was part, I think, of a broader managerial globalization message. You've got to upskill your country, but it will be done in a certain way through the university model or through higher education. It was always a bit unclear. Now, here we had Keir Starmer saying that, he said very explicitly, that no longer works for the times that we're in. The message there is there are a lot of people who would actually don't want to be doing probably not great grade courses, paying through the nose for education. Probably a lot of parents were thinking, yes, I quite want to hear that too, but they would be worried what happens to their children if they don't do this. So the answer was this gold-plated, note the advertising language there, apprentice schemes, which would be brought in and well supported, he said, which would be 2-year high-grade apprenticeships. Now, that absolutely delighted the hall. There is still, I think, something about Labour that loves the idea of apprenticeships. Maybe it's forward-looking, maybe it also maybe it harks back to a time when things were made more by hand, when you could talk about the tool makers, the people who work by hand as well as by brain, to channel Marx. And I think what he's done there, he set up quite a big promise that can be delivered, and that gets people where they want to be, which is on the track to work and good paid jobs.
For the apprenticeships announcement, the government has announced in the last few minutes, actually, Anne, that it will invest nearly £800 million extra into funding 16 to 19-year-old education from next year, all from the existing spending review settlement, which will basically create an additional 20,000 students to help them reach that 2/3 target. The big picture, though, is I thought it was a bit of a backing for Bridget Phillipson. and her way of thinking about education. This isn't about the middle classes, this is about supporting working classes. There is something about the way that Keir Starmer and actually Bridget Phillipson talk about middle classes as not quite one of us because we are working people. That is a very different type of politics to what we heard from Blair, and a big departure and a brave departure. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think this was particularly a speech for the middle class in the way that we're quite used to, perhaps accustomed to by Labour, somewhat guiltily. Someone's obviously come in who's getting a good reception here around us. It was a speech, I think, for people who are a bit resentful that the middle class, the educated class, the class that runs British political parties by and large, and the Labour Party have got it good in life, and that they've been, if you like, on an upward ladder. They've been carried upwards while others got left behind. You made a really interesting point to me. How does someone like Keir Starmer, who has risen from a hard-scrabble, quite complex family background, but has risen to a high position in society, in his professions, very well off, how can you still do that? And I think that's right. He's channeling the kind of language and approach we hear from people like Bridget Phillipson. Probably we're also hearing, we used to hear from Angela Rayner when she was around at conference. So I think there is something there. He's not saying I feel guilty about it, but he is saying I'm identifying more with the people who feel a bit of resentment towards people like me. I thought that was actually okay, because you can't change yourself. It's interesting what we hear in accents. See, I'm originally from the north of England, Sam, you're from the south. When I hear Keir Starmer, I don't hear a particularly posh accent. I think what he realises is he's just got to sound a bit like himself and then say what he wants to say. Otherwise you get very tangled in trying to make yourself different to the way you are, and that never works.
There's a section of the speech about not wanting to be lectured. I think a bit of not wanting to be lectured by the middle class. Let's just listen to that.
And let me tell you, I also know what I stand against. And I have had enough of lectures from self-appointed champions of working people who want to shred our public service, level down workers' rights, crash the economy like Liz Truss. Politicians who lied to this country, unleashed chaos, and walked away after Brexit, who equivocate of Putin in Ukraine, who even now go to America and grub around for money, talking this great country down. No more lectures from them, because Labour is the party for working people, Labour is the party for national renewal, Labour is the patriotic party.
So there was fire in the belly for working people in the audience. I just want to pivot in the last couple of minutes to this other big thought. For me, the biggest issue in British politics was ignored. As we talk, most mornings, the 20 to 30 billion pound black hole, which will define this year in British politics, was not mentioned at all. There was a brief sort of acknowledgement that businesses paid a lot in tax. There was a defence of fiscal rules saying that if you let basically the stewardship of the public finance run out of control, it's working people that paid the price. But there was none of the pitch rolling for what continues to look like a massive moment on November the 26th. I do think that at this conference, and I can now say this confidently after this speech, there is an element of cowardice in the Labour Party, unwilling to face up to the biggest thing that's going on in our politics, which is that black hole. Because I'm sure as damn that if 20 to 30 billion pounds of taxes are imposed in November the 26th, everybody's hair is going to be on fire. Why don't they talk about it?
Well, then why? I'm thinking this is what's been happening around Keir Starmer, new head of communications there, Tim Allen coming in, very focused on how you cut through, moving quickly. He'll say if it's an elephant in the room, but you really want to appeal to the room, just ignore the elephant for a while. The elephant will be there. It'll be there in the budget. That'll be Rachel Reeves as a problem to deal with. Keir Starmer can come in behind her there. I think this was a Save Our Starmer speech, and that was its intention, not to open up the fronts or have any talk about black holes.
I wonder whether we will still be remembering this speech on December the 1st after the budget has got out of the way. That's our limit. We don't bust our budget, and we stop at the moment that we meet our self-imposed limit, unlike Rachel Reeves. So we will see you back tomorrow morning for Politics at Sam and Nan's at the usual time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
The many, not the few.